I am so glad to be here this morning and just be able to worship with you. I was doing some study this week in the Word and just came to the realization as I was preparing for the music for today and to hear what Pastor is going to bring us, just about the love of God and the fact that God's love has done so much for us. And so as we get into this morning and as we get ready to worship, just take a minute and think about the love of God and how has He showed you His love this week. And then as we ponder that, as we think about that, let's stand together and just worship Him. I want to begin with a song called Your Name. It was written back in 2006. But just about the fact that His name is a strong and mighty tower that we can run to. It's that place of refuge because we know that God loves us and He cares for us. And so He is that refuge for us. As morning dawns and evening fades, you inspire songs of praise that rise from earth to touch your heart and glorify your name. Your name is a strong and mighty tower. Your name is a shelter like no other. Your name, let the nations sing it louder, 'cause nothing has the power to save but your name. Jesus, in your name we pray. Come and fill our hearts today. Lord, give us strength to live for you and glorify your name. Your name is a strong and mighty tower. Your name is a shelter like no other. Your name, let the nations sing it louder, 'cause nothing has the power to save your name. But your name is a strong and mighty tower. Your name is a shelter like no other. Your name, let the nations sing it louder, 'cause nothing has the power to save but your name. Over all the earth you reign on high, every mountain stream, every sunset sky. But my one request, Lord, my only aim, is that you reign in me again. Lord, reign in me, reign in your power over all my dreams. In my darkest hour, you are the Lord of all I am. So won't you reign in me again? How many of you that was new? No? Over every thought, over every word, may my life reflect the beauty of my Lord. 'Cause you more to me than any earthly thing. That you reign in me again. Lord, reign in me, reign in your power over all my dreams. In my darkest hour, you are the Lord of all So won't you reign in me again? Lord, reign in me. Reign in your power over all my dreams. In my darkest hour, you are the Lord of all I am. So won't you reign in me again? So won't you reign in me again? So won't you reign in me again? And we want the Lord to be reigning in us and through us as he works with us. Actually, we're working with him. You know, as we think about Valentine's Day and we think about love and we think about all those things, and what is love really when we think about it? Our society has the concept and the definition of love so messed up. It really does. And love is that action. Christ said that, you know, there's no greater love than a person lay down his life for his friend and to serve that way. And that's what he did for us. Let's sing this together. This song was an old song that I grew up with, just a little chorus actually, written in 1971 by Otis Skillings. But it's true. It's the love of Christ through his grace that holds us together. We are one in the bond of love. We are one in the bond of love. We have joined our spirit with the Spirit of God. We are one in the bond of love. Sing that much again. We are one in the bond of love. We are one in the bond of love. We have joined our spirit with the Spirit of God. We are one in the bond of love. Let us sing now. Let us sing now, everyone. Let us feel his love begun. Let us join our hands that the world will know we are one in the bond of love. Lord, I come to you. Let my heart be changed, renewed, flowing from the grace that I found in you. Lord, I've come to know the weaknesses I see in me will be stripped away by the power of your love. Hold me close, let your love surround me. Bring me near, draw me to your side. And as I wait, I'll rise up like the eagle, and I will soar with you. Your spirit leads me on in the power of your love. Lord, unveil my eyes, let me see you face to face, image of your love as you live in me. in my life, in living every day, by the power of your love. Hold me close, let your love surround me. Bring me near, draw me to your side. And as I wait, I'll rise up like the eagle, and I will soar with you. Your spirit leads me on in the power of your love, and I will soar. And I will soar with you. Your spirit leads me on in the power of your love. You may be seated.
Thanks, Aaron, and thanks, Becca. We appreciate that. Many of you have heard me speak of Tyler, a young neighbor boy in Fort Wayne that Nancy and I befriended when he was 8 years old. He's soon this month, he's going to be 23. But he did not come from a church background at all. And we would pick him up and we'd bring him to church. And Tyler loves music. He just loves music. And The Power of Love, that was his favorite church song. And so I told Nancy this past week, I said, Aaron's going to be doing The Power of Love. I said, what's that remind you of? And she said, Tyler. And he'd come to church. He thought we were supposed to sing that song every week. He knew I had a little say with the worship leader as to what we would sing, and he wanted to sing The Power of Love every week. And so that's that. Whenever that song comes up, man, I tell you, I just think about Tyler. And I'm going to begin at least a 2-part series, maybe even a 3-part series on 1 Corinthians chapter 13 that's usually just known as the love chapter. And just want to share with you some thoughts. Sometimes you'll hear children being asked to address a certain subject, and their answers are kind of interesting. You'll see the children from St. Jude's on TV. Some of you, that commercial where they're asked about love, and that little boy that says, "You got to go see the love doctor." Yeah, how many of you seen that one? Cute commercial. But these are some ideas that children had about love. Tom, age 5. Once I'm in kindergarten, I'm going to find me a wife. Glenn, age 7. If falling in love is anything like learning how to spell, I don't want to do it. It takes too long. Kenny, age 7. It gives me a headache to think about that stuff. I'm just a kid. I don't need that kind of trouble. Ava, age 8. One of you should know how to write a check, because even if you have tons of love, there's still going to be a lot of bills. Greg, age 8. Love is the most important thing in the world, but baseball is pretty good too. Manuel, age 8. I think you're supposed to get shot with an arrow or something, but the rest of it isn't supposed to be painful. Dave, age 8. love will find you even if you're trying to hide from it. I've been trying to hide from it since I was 5, but the girls keep finding me. May, age 9. No one is sure why love happens, but I heard it has something to do with how you smell. That's why perfume and deodorants are so important. Roger, age 9. Love is like an avalanche where you have to run for your life. Regina, age 10. I'm not rushing into love. I'm finding 4th grade hard enough. They got it all figured out, don't they? Those kids, experts on the subject of love. But as we think in terms of the Bible, let me give you some thoughts concerning love. And I think where we need to start is 1 John 4:16. 1 John 4:16, where it says, God is love. That's a great place to start. It doesn't just say that God demonstrates His love. It says that God's very nature is love. It's love. And I've been working this past couple weeks on annual reports that have to go out to the denomination and also the district by the deadline is actually tomorrow. We actually got them in Thursday, so we're in compliance. But one of the things they ask you is, what are your own personal goals for 2021? And the first thing I wrote on my report was, I would like to become more loving and compassionate. I really would. It's not the easiest thing in the world for a guy who's a choleric temperament. If you know what choleric temperament is, that's what I am. My wife says I'm 100% choleric. It is the temperament of the Apostle Paul, by the way, so if you think of Paul, but to be more loving and more of a compassionate person. God is love. And in 1 Corinthians 13, the love that Paul is talking about is agape love. Agape love. The Greeks had 4 different words that they used for love. They used agape. I'll explain that a little bit in a moment. Agape love, eros, philia, and storge. 4 different kinds of love, but the highest form of love is agape love. That's God's love. And that's what we're being called to put into practice in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, is that highest form of love. For God so loved the world. That's agape. And because of that love that is His very nature, God is love, it caused Him to demonstrate that love in some way. For God so loved the world, what? That He gave His only begotten Son. What kind of love is that agape love, that highest form of love that is God's love? What kind of love is that? It's sacrificial love. He sacrificed His Son. It's unconditional love. It's loving with no limits. We are called as Christians to live at the highest form of love, God's love, agape. And I realize the bar is raised real high here. It's raised real high. The first thing I want you to notice today is the priority of love. The priority of love. Back in Matthew chapter 22, beginning verse 34, Matthew 22:34, hearing that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, the Pharisees got together. One of them, an expert in the law, tested Him with this question: Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? Jesus replied, Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. When he was asked, what's the greatest commandment? He said basically everything in the Christian life comes down to two things: your relationship with God and your relationship with other people. Loving God and loving others summarizes all of it. That agape love, the priority of love, right there it is. Above everything else, love God and love your neighbor. How many of the problems in society would be solved if everyone loved God and loved their neighbor? Think about it. In Galatians chapter 5, verse 22, the Apostle Paul gives 9 fruit of the Spirit in verses 22 and 23. But the first one, the fruit of highest priority, but the fruit of the Spirit is, where does it start? Love, number 1. And all the rest of those fruit flow out of that first one. If you don't have that first one in place, forget about the other ones. That is the priority of love. And now, these 3 remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. 1 Corinthians 13:13. The greatest of these is love. That's why I'm talking about the priority of love this morning. The priority. Now, when we get to 1 Corinthians 13, the first 3 verses, which give us the priority of love, verses 1 through 3, the context demonstrates that what Paul is doing here is he's presenting hypothetical examples of the most extreme and excessive acts possible. All right? That's what he's doing in the first 3 verses. These are hypothetical, they're excessive and extreme acts. All right? He says in verse 1, if I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. He says, if I could speak with the greatest of eloquence, if I could speak all the languages of humanity and of heaven, if I possessed great gifts of communication, if I had the fluency and the eloquence of the greatest linguist or orator, if I was a true wordsmith, and yet I didn't possess love as the motivation behind my communication, I'm just making noise. It's like the young preacher went up to an older preacher and he said, boy, I tell you what, I just love to preach. And the older minister said, that's great, but I got a question for you. Do you love the people to whom you preach? You see, it's got to be motivated by love. If I have the greatest gift of communication, verse 2, he says, if I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains but have not love, I am nothing. If I have great gifts of comprehension, wow. 1 Corinthians 8:1 says, knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. You know of people that are extremely intelligent, extremely smart, but they're arrogant? Knowledge can puff up, but love builds up. Builds up. And then the great gifts of confidence. If I have a faith that can move mountains, and Paul is not speaking about saving faith here, he is speaking about miracle working faith. You know, even if I had a faith that was a miracle working faith, if I don't have love, what's the point? What's the point? Verse 3, if I give all I possess to the poor, if I have great gifts of compassion, if I give everything I have to the poor, if I have a great gift of commitment, if I surrender my body to the flames but have not love, I gain nothing. If I become a martyr for a cause, if I'm burned at the stake, if I pay the ultimate sacrifice, but I don't have love, I gain nothing. Wow. In those first 3 verses, Paul is still speaking about spiritual gifts. That's what chapter 12 is all about. It's the most extensive chapter in the Bible on spiritual gifts. In those first 3 verses, he actually mentions 5 spiritual gifts. All right? The gift of tongues, the gift of prophecy, the gift of knowledge, the gift of faith, and the gift of giving. He actually says, if I possess these spiritual gifts, but I don't have love, they're useless to me. They're useless to me. There's a possibility that a person can possess great spiritual gifts without love. There is an emptiness produced when love is absent. And love was very absent in this church in Corinth. This was a church that, I call it the world's worst church. And I know that's really saying something. This church was horrible. I'm glad our church isn't like this. I don't know if I'd last very long as pastor of a church like Corinth. Let me tell you some of the stuff going on there. And then you'll understand why Paul thought it was so important to devote a whole chapter to love. If you don't understand the context, you won't understand why Paul does what he does here. This was a church that had all kinds of division. There was no unity in this church. One person said, I follow Paul. Another one says, I follow Apollos. Another says, I follow Peter. And the other one says, no, I follow Christ. And they had all these divisive groups in their church. And it just wasn't coming together. Things got so bad that they had members of their church that were taking other members of this church to court in lawsuits, suing each other. I mean, think about that. They had people in the church that were fighting over spiritual gifts. Which ones were the most important? And, well, I think my gift's better than your gift. And they're fighting over spiritual gifts. We won't even talk about what the Spirit was like when they came to celebrate communion. And people were getting drunk, and other people were being gluttonous at the Lord's Supper. In 1 Corinthians chapter 5, we're told about, Paul says, there's sexual immorality among you that is of such a nature, this kind of stuff doesn't even occur among the pagans. A man has his father's wife. A son was having sexual relations with his stepmother, and the whole church knew it was going on. Crazy. Craziness. And all this was going on in a church. Do you understand why Paul takes a little break from talking about spiritual gifts and says, listen, I'm going to devote a whole chapter here. When are you going to start loving each other? This isn't just a chapter that sounds profound that we can use at weddings. There was a purpose behind the placement of this chapter. This was the world's worst church. But he felt if I could get people to love each other, maybe this church could turn around. The priority of love, it has to be present in every church. Amen? There's no substitute for agape love. We have salt substitutes. We have sugar substitutes. I can go on and on. We have substitute teachers. We have all this stuff where we can substitute something or someone for something else. There is no substitute for love. Either a church has it or they don't. And this church didn't have it. They didn't have it. Well, we've looked at the priority of love. In verses 4 through 7, we have the properties of love. The properties of love. Verses 4 through 7. Love is a word that is very difficult to define. It really is. If I was to ask you, how would you define love? It's kind of hard. But if I was to ask you to describe love, that's a little easier. And so what Paul does here in verses 4 through 7, he does not give us a description or a definition of love. He gives us a description of love. Okay? That's what we have in verses 4 through 7. There are 15 short phrases that show us the full spectrum of love. That's what we have. Some are given to us in the positive, some are given to us in the negative, and we'll look at those in just a moment. The first one, love is patient. Most of us wish that wasn't the first one on the list. You know what I'm talking about? Love is patient. That's where love starts. When I was in high school, I was a hurdler. I loved to run the hurdles. And I guess it's because I like the combination of speed but also skill. Running hurdles is not an easy thing to do. And so sometimes when I come to this passage here, love is patient. Sometimes I see myself tripping over the first hurdle. Before I even get going, I've already tripped over the first hurdle, man. Love is patient. Now, in the Greek, there are two words for patience. One is the word macrothumia, and the other is hupomane. But they're very specific words. And the word that's used for patience here is macrothumia, which means a patience with difficult people. All right? Hupomane means patience with difficult circumstances. All right? But the one that's used here, love is patient. Macrothumia, he is saying love is patient with difficult people. Now, don't raise your hands. How many of you have some difficult people in your lives? Some, maybe more than one. Love is patient. It means to be long-tempered versus having a short fuse. That's what the word means. Long-tempered rather than having a short fuse. The King James Version says, charity suffereth long. This idea of love is patient. It is the fourth fruit of the Spirit. Love, joy, peace. It's that fourth one, patience. All right? Love is patient. That's a fruit of the Spirit here. I love the story about Abraham Lincoln. Early during the Civil War, there was a man who was very outspoken against Abraham Lincoln. He was extremely critical. His name was Edwin Stanton. He said some terrible things. In fact, no one treated Lincoln with more contempt than Edwin Stanton. He called him a cunning clown. He said, I don't understand why people would go to Africa to see a gorilla when we have one right here in Springfield, Illinois. He referred to the president as a gorilla. He had no respect for Lincoln at all. And Abraham Lincoln had a position open, Secretary of Defense. He picked Edwin Stanton to fill that position. People couldn't believe it. They said, well, don't you understand what he's been saying about you? Haven't you heard? And Lincoln says, I've heard. They said, well, then why in the world would you choose Edwin Stanton to be your Secretary of Defense? And he said, well, he's the best man for the job. Can you imagine that? He's the best man for the job. In April of 1865, President Lincoln was assassinated. They took him across the street. They put him in a little room. That's where his body was taken. Edwin Stanton came into that room. He looked down on Lincoln's silent face. And with tears in his eyes, Stanton said, there lies the greatest ruler of men this world has ever seen. How did that happen? Love is patient. And patience won Edwin Stanton over. That kind of love won him over. Patient love won in the end. The supreme example of patient love, obviously, is God Himself. It's God's patient love that prevents this world from being destroyed. It's God's patient love that keeps you and I out of hell. It's God's patient love that allows people to be saved. 2 Peter 3:9 says, the Lord is not slow in keeping His promise, as some understand slowness. He is patient, macrothumia. He's patient with you, not wanting anyone to perish, but everyone to come to repentance. It's this patient love that we see in Acts chapter 7 as Stephen is being stoned. And the very last verse in that chapter, he looks up to heaven and he says, Lord, do not lay this sin to their charge. It's that love, that patient love that Jesus demonstrated as He hung upon that cruel cross. The very first recorded words from the cross, Father, forgive them, they don't know what they're doing. Love is patient with difficult people. I mean, that's a sermon in itself right there. But let's look at the next one. Love is patient. Love is kind. Kind. That word that's used there for kind is a reference to the fifth fruit of the Spirit. Love, joy, peace, patience. The fifth one is kindness. All right? Kindness. And the word kindness means serving. It means to be gracious. And one point that's always built into that Greek word for kindness is the idea of generosity. Being generous is built into there too. That's what it means, to be kind. It means to be gracious, to be generous. There's an illustration that in preparation for this message this week, I read Max Lucado's book, A Love Worth Giving, Living in the Overflow of God's Love. It's in our church library if you'd like to read it. Well, it's not now because I've got it here, but it will be in the church library. All right. But this book, A Love Worth Giving, the entire book is written on 1 Corinthians chapter 13. That's why I chose it. I knew it was written on 1 Corinthians 13. In that book, Max Lucado gives one of the most powerful illustrations on love is kind that you could find. He tells a story about back in 1921 at Sing Sing Prison in New York State. Back in 1921, they had 107 inmates in that prison. Sing Sing Prison is still in existence today. They have 1,700 inmates at Sing Sing today. I just want to kind of show you where we're at. But in 1921, they had 107 inmates. It's a maximum security prison. It's where the worst of the worst of criminals are sentenced. In 1921, they had a new warden at Sing Sing Prison. His name was Louis Laws. He was a young man. He had a wife named Catherine. And he had 3 little daughters. Everybody warned his wife Catherine, don't go behind the walls of that prison. And don't ever take your little daughters there. But she didn't listen. She didn't listen. She went to the first organized basketball game that was played at that prison. And she sat up in the bleachers with her 3 little daughters and the inmates that weren't playing. She once said, my husband and I are going to take care of these men, and I believe they will take care of me. I don't have anything to worry about. For 16 years, Catherine Laws showed kindness, loving kindness to these inmates. She heard about one inmate who was blind. Catherine went out and learned how to read using Braille, and she taught this blind man how to read. He had never learned to read. She knew that there were a number of these inmates who were hearing impaired. She went out and she learned sign language so that she could communicate with them. For 16 years, she loved on these 107 inmates, the worst of the worst. In 1937, the world saw the difference that real love makes. You see, the inmates knew something was wrong when Lewis Laws didn't report to work one day. And then all of a sudden, there was a story that began to circulate at Sing Sing prison. The story was that Catherine Laws had been killed in a car accident. The following day, her body was placed in her home. Her home was about 3/4 of a mile away from Sing Sing prison. As the acting warden took his early morning walk, he noticed a large gathering at the main gate. Every prisoner was pressed against the fence. Eyes were filled with tears. Faces were solemn. No one spoke and nobody moved. They had come to stand as close as they could to the woman who had given them love. That was as close as they could get, was the exterior fence. And then the warden made a remarkable decision. He said, "All right, men, you can go. Just be sure to check in tonight." The warden unlocked the gate for them, and America's worst criminals walked without escort and without guard to the home of Catherine Laws to pay their last respects. And to a man, and out of respect for Catherine Laws, each one returned to the prison that night. Love is kind. Love is kind. Well, we've looked at 2 positive characteristics of love. Love is patient. Love is kind. Now, Paul is going to give us 8 negative characteristics of love. We've looked at what love is. Now, Paul's going to tell us what love is not. 8 negative characteristics. The first one is love does not envy. Love does not envy. The word that is used for envy is the word from which we get our English word zeal, which means passion. Passion. It can be a good thing or it can be a bad thing. All right? It means, it's the same word that we have in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 31, where it says, but eagerly desire. That's the same word that's used here for envy. Desire. Zelao. Zelao. It's the same word. Now, I'm not going to split hairs between jealousy and envy, because the word zelao includes both. I've never quite understood the difference between jealousy and envy, to be honest with you. To me, I've always used them interchangeably. And the Bible does too, by the way. There's 2 kinds of jealousy. I want what someone else has. That's one form. The second one is, I wish they didn't have what they have. You see the difference? I want what they have. Well, I wish they didn't have what they have. It's kind of desiring evil on someone else. Love does not envy. Instead of wishing I had what you have, love helps me to celebrate what God has given you without being jealous of it. We are to rejoice with those who rejoice, and we are to mourn and weep with those who mourn and weep. I think sometimes it's tougher for us to rejoice with those who rejoice than it is to weep with those who weep. You know. Somebody gets a brand new car, brand new truck. Oh, I wish I had that. How come they got that? How come I don't have that? Someone gets a promotion on a job. Well, I wonder why they got promoted. How come I didn't get promoted? See, this is envy, it's jealousy, and it's more subtle than what we want to realize. It's really out there. I mean, it really is. This jealousy, this envy. Let me tell you an illustration that brought it home to me. There was this little girl in second grade, and she had collected a fair amount of money from the tooth fairy. Her name was Rachel, and every time she lost a tooth, her mother put it in an envelope and placed it under Rachel's pillow. Rachel only wished she had more teeth so she could get more money. Well, lo and behold, in the morning the tooth was gone, and in its place was $2. Rachel was content. She thought that was great, getting $2 for her tooth. Until one day Rachel was visiting a friend who told her of putting her tooth under a pillow and finding $10 the next morning. Now we got a problem, don't we? Rachel's getting $2 for her tooth. Her friend's getting $10. Suddenly, Rachel was no longer content. Her friend's $10 was a whole lot more than her $2, so she asked her friend's mother, "Would you please call my mom and tell her which tooth fairy you use?" Did you catch the point there, though? $2 was fine until her friend was getting 10. Well, there are a lot of stories in the Bible that are stories of jealousy and envy. There's a person here, there's a great example of someone in the Bible who understands that love does not envy. And the positive example of that is Jonathan in the Old Testament. Jonathan. In 1 Samuel 18:4 it says, Jonathan took off the robe he was wearing and gave it to David, along with his tunic and even his sword, his bow and his belt. Jonathan was never jealous. He was never envious of the fact that David was going to be the next king. Jonathan could have been jealous. He was King Saul's son. He was in the line of succession as they normally chose kings. But he got it. Love does not envy. He was happy that David was going to be the next king. He totally supported him. He totally encouraged him. It was a beautiful relationship that Jonathan and David had because there was no jealousy there. There was no envy. I couldn't find too many other positive examples of love does not envy in the Bible. I couldn't find too many. Most of the examples are negative. Most of the stories are negative. And I'm just going to give you a few. Cain's jealousy of Abel. Remember that one? Someday I'm going to preach on that because I don't think people understand what's going on there very well. They want to deal with the sacrifice and the fact that Cain's sacrifice did not contain blood because they're missing the point. All right? There's something far more important going on in that rejection of that offering than that. And I want to preach on that someday. How about Joseph's brothers who sold him into slavery because of jealousy? What was it? Cain was jealous of Abel because of Abel's offering that was accepted while his was rejected. With Joseph's brothers, they put him in a pit and they sold him as a slave, but he came to check on his brothers, and what was the first thing they did when they saw Joseph coming? What was the first thing they did? He had that ornamented robe, the coat of many colors, as some people call it. You can call it whatever you want. The dream coat, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. First thing they did when they saw Joseph coming, they stripped him of his coat. All right? Now we're going to get back to why they did that. How about what landed Daniel in the lion's den? The jealousy of the administrators, because the king had decided to put Daniel over the entire kingdom. They were jealous of the fact that Daniel got something they didn't get. He was getting a job promotion, and they weren't. How about the jealousy that was caused by the elder brother in the parable of the prodigal son? He resented the father's attention that had been given to the prodigal son. And he even came back and told his father, "You never threw a party for me." Now, I want you to see there's a pattern here in this jealousy. David returns from killing Goliath, and the women come out into the streets, and they're singing and they're dancing. And as they danced, they sang, "Saul has slain his thousands, but David his tens of thousands." And Saul was jealous of David's success and the praise that was being heaped on David. The Bible says Saul was very angry, and from that time on, Saul kept a jealous eye on David. Interesting way to say it, isn't it? A jealous eye. Kept a jealous eye on him. Now, what am I teaching here this morning? When it comes to jealousy, the root of jealousy and envy is always when we think we are receiving less than what we deserve. We feel like we're getting shortchanged. That's the root of where jealousy and envy enters right there. God, you accepted my brother's sacrifice. You didn't accept mine. Well, Joseph got this fancy coat. We didn't get one. Daniel got a job promotion. We didn't get one. You threw a party for my younger brother, but you never threw a party for me. You're praising David, but I'm not getting the credit I think I deserve. You see what I'm saying? You study it through the Scriptures. You see it there all the time. This jealousy comes about when we think that somehow, someone, or sometimes even God has shortchanged us in comparison to somebody else. They've got straight A kids that do well academically at school, but Lord, you shortchanged me. I got kids that they can't sit still. They're having trouble learning. These other kids, they're getting dollars for A's. I'm saving my money on my kids. I don't have to reward them with anything. They're not getting A's. And I could go down. Somehow, we have this attitude that somebody else has it a lot better than us. Their situation is far superior to ours, and we've kind of been shortchanged. Come on now, anybody know what I'm talking about? How can they afford to take that expensive of a vacation? We can't afford that. Do we rejoice with them when they have a chance to go on vacation? No, we look at ourselves in the mirror and we say, oh, man, I got shortchanged. I haven't been on an expensive vacation in years. Are we seeing it today? Love does not envy. Love doesn't go there. I think our society needs to be totally re-educated on what love is. I think our society has confused love with lust. They got them confused. We've still got 12 more to go of these. Like I said, we may be doing this the whole month of February. Oh, we got 3. We got 3. That's enough to swallow for one Sunday, I think. It's probably more than enough. It's love is patient. Somebody give me the second one. Love is kind. Love does not envy. Wow. All right, we'll see you next week. Thanks for coming. We'll see you next week as we go on to the next 12. All right.